Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. That's Geoff Ketchum. I'm Ari Temkin. This is the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, getting updates and nuggets on the latest in recruiting and the transfer portal, which has obviously been a huge piece to the offseason so far. But I also want to kind of look at what this thing looks like on the field compared to everybody else in 2022. Before we get into that, make sure you have hit that thumbs up button, the like button, and ask your questions down below in the chat, and subscribe to the channel. It's always a good place to go too.
That's probably our favorite thing. We love it when you do that. We do. It's literally right there below the screen. Sorry.
You can't miss it. It's there. Okay, so let's start with anything that you've been hearing from, player Ochaun Mathis, anything you've heard from in the let's just start with kind of like updates on Nuggets transfer portal recruiting.
Well, I think the interesting thing for the transfer portal, and I wonder, I've been watching from as close up, I was going to say from afar, like how far am I from it, right? A button, a click. But Texas seems to have hit a little bit of a lull of sorts. And you mentioned Mathis from TCU, who will emerge as one of the most important portal guys that the Longhorns have in this class. I mean, there's so few proven edge players that enter the portal that his presence is insanely valuable for Texas. At this point, there's nobody else that's even on the radar that's of that level.
And just to clarify that, like when you've got a proven pass rusher, you now have a guy on film that offenses have to game plan for. And so if this is a guy that, regardless of the amount of production he's actually bringing to the table, but this is a guy that's getting after the quarterback and has through his career, then now all of a sudden it's like, well, we got to bring a running back to chip, or we got to bring an extra lineman out there. So to your point, it's the reputation of his production and an NFL prospect that, regardless of the actual production he has at Texas or anywhere else next year, he brings a ton to the team just by that alone.
Well, you can make a real case like he's worth his weight in gold in the sense that a proven pass rusher is a guy that can get to the quarterback on any down is exactly the thing that the Texas defense is missing. And you do that, you got a guy that does that, and suddenly your cornerbacks and your safeties look better. And every part of that defense is better with the presence of a playmaker on it. And this Texas defense lacks playmakers. The unique thing about Mathis is that he's 10 credits shy of getting his degree at TCU. So he's going to get his degree at TCU. And he'll be available to transfer wherever he's going to transfer right at the beginning of the summer, June. So it's not a complete lost cause. He gets a chance to spend a couple of months with his teammates, learning the offense or defense, as the case may be, before workouts would begin in August. But he doesn't have to make a decision for months. The fact that he's able to both A, take his time, and B, plays a position worth that much weight makes him a very unique recruit in the portal in general. And it will make him one of the most valuable. I can count on one hand in all of college football the schools that don't need help with pass rush. So he's probably not hearing from Alabama. Georgia's probably not picking up the phone. That might be it, though. Like, everybody else needs pass rushers. There's no team in the country that's like, do you know who we don't need? A guy who's all conference that can get to the quarterback 10 times a year. Those guys are worth their value to such a degree that Texas is going to, I think, really be in a position where they're going to have to fight some schools off for him. So if this kid was making a decision a week ago, it's Texas, right? Because Gary Patterson's at Texas, and I think they could hit him up on the NIL front. There's a lot of things that would have pointed in that direction. I think for the next 3 or 4 months, he will be courted, quite frankly, as a guy in his position probably should be. And then he's going to have options to choose from. And Texas will almost certainly be one of those options. But this isn't Texas shooting from the layup line, far from it. And what they'll have to do between now and May, when he really has to do something, is prove that their scheme fits best. I think there's a conversation there about a guy that wants to play in a true 4-3 defense and what Texas offers up and Pete Kwiatkowski's defense, which as I was doing a video with Alex Dunlap this past week about this very thing, and I was like, what would you say if you're Kwiatkowski and he's asking about this 3-man thing? He goes, I was just telling him that we run a 4-man 3. And then, because, depending on the down, one guy, sometimes it looks like you've got 3, sometimes it looks like you got 4. It kind of depends on who, like he starts getting into this, technically standpoint. Technically, Texas doesn't run a traditional 4-3. So they got a lot of things that I think will be massaged when that kid's in the recruiting process. He's the name that everybody will know most right now in terms of, hey, who's on the board? But that recruitment has a long way to go. And there are dynamics involved within it that I don't know that we've ever seen before in the history of college football. I mean, we're still early in the portal infancy. I don't remember a pass rusher last year of his quality just lurking in the portal. You had the tight end, Eric Armstead, who was from or Gilbert, who was from LSU that went to Florida, but then couldn't qualify and was out. You had the linebacker that eventually went to Ohio State, Galileat. I believe I'm butchering his last name, but he was the kid from USC that was going to potentially end up at Texas and then ends up going to Ohio State. For the most part, there weren't sagas.
Right.
And I don't want to paint this kid as getting ready to be in a saga, but we know of him in January. He's got 5 visits. He's got time on his side. He himself may not want to think of this as a saga, but I would almost say anything in recruiting that's more than a couple of days is what we call a saga. And that one will have some twists and turns in it that, we're just going to have to follow as they go down.
All right. So in line with that, when you sort of start to piece together what this team looks like and what the 2 deep looks like and expectations and looking at the talent, and then you look at the Big 12, what do you see? Who's the team to beat in the Big 12 in 2022?
Well, God, I was having this debate in my head the other day and I didn't get very far with it. It seems like, there's a group of 4 teams, and whether they're the right 4 teams or not doesn't matter, but you've got Oklahoma State and Baylor, and then you've got the traditional 2, Oklahoma and Texas, and where all of those teams fit together in this year where Oklahoma's not the defending champion. I think that, right. that takes some getting used to. It's been more than half a decade since Lincoln Riley or some version of him and Bob Stoops haven't been just running roughshod over body in the Big 12. That did not happen this year. So now you have to look at, of the top 2 teams, forget about Oklahoma and Texas for a year, from last year. If we look at the 2 championship game teams, I'm not quite sure I know what to make of Baylor. I think they're still going to be really good. They lose their running back, and that was no small thing. It seems strange to think that, what's his name, Abner Smith?
Abram Smith, yep.
Abram Smith, yeah. It seems strange to think that a guy who'd been playing defense the year before moves to running back and then turns into this really crazy, valuable player. Right. But I really think he was that guy for them.
Totally.
Offensively, they feel like a work in progress, a work in something. Whereas I feel like, but defensively, that team, they're going to be good. And I know they've got turnover there, but I think I trust Dave Aranda that he's going to have a good defense. And they do return some good pieces. They have that big nose tackle up front.
Ika.
And then they've got a guy who's transferring in as a defensive lineman who they think can be one of the top 2, probably the 1-2 best defensive line kind of
Jackson player
in the Big 12. So
from Tulsa player.
Yes. So I think the combination of those 2 guys, they're going to be stout up front. I mean, they may have a 1-2 up front that just about anybody in the conference, including Oklahoma and Texas, would trade if given the opportunity. Now it's about lining up the rest of that stuff. And again, I don't quite know what to make of Baylor offensively, but I think we're going through a complete change in the Big 12 where I don't know that 50 or 45 or 40 is the number that you have to hit every week. Oklahoma, for such a long time, had been putting such an elite level offense out that it felt like in order to win the conference, you had to have at least 40. Because what would happen when you would play them in a game? You would need 60 or whatever.
Right.
Oklahoma, under its new leadership and without Lincoln Riley, that is not the historically amazing offensive juggernaut that existed for so long. I wonder now, it's like, okay, well, 30 will win you a game in the Big 12 now. I mean,
right. And it's been trending, I think, in that direction.
You're right.
For a bunch of reasons. But I mean, then you add now a defensive minded head coach in Brent Venables, and suddenly like, okay, yeah, that's probably another program that's going to be more defensive centric, even though, you know, Lebby is more of an air and out guy. I kind of did the same thing with you where it's like, all right, Baylor should be pretty good, but still major question marks on offense. And
is it Ohio State? Is it as simple as Mullet Man has the best team coming back? And that might not look sexy because who the hell wants to talk Oklahoma State football?
Right.
But
yeah,
it was a really good team that does return some really important parts.
And experience at quarterback. I know Spencer Sanders has not been great in his career and a lot of turnovers, but still, it's a guy that, you know, if you're returning a quarterback, you're in good shape. Oklahoma and Texas are obviously starting new quarterbacks. I found this really interesting. So Baylor played 5 one-score conference games last year and won 4 of them. The other Power 5 conference champs all basically like played like one-score conference game. Baylor played 4 of them and played 5 of them and won 4 of them. Oklahoma State won 2 one-score games and lost 2 others. So they were in 4 of them. They also won all 4 of their non-conference games, including the Fiesta Bowl, by 1 score. Iowa State lost 4 one-score Big 12 games. Texas lost 5, which is crazy to think because that seems like a lot like what we were doing with Tom Herman. So,
well, it's the flip side of what Baylor did. I mean, you're talking about 50-50 games where in coin flips, one side gets it right every single time. And the other, it's like, well, no, the math on that says they should have got a couple. And then that third one could go either way. I think it says that Baylor's due to probably regress to the mean a little bit. Consequently, Texas, by almost doing nothing else, having such an adverse record in that same situation, you would think, I mean, Texas on the whole felt like a 7-5 kind of team a year ago. They were so good against the best teams, right? So they're leading Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Baylor in the second half of games and closing in none of them. Prototypical 7-5 team. It took some real work. It took losing all their coin flips and then some, because essentially that's what happened.
Right. And I mean, you basically had a team that was engaged, that bought in, that they lost 3 straight, and suddenly they weren't engaged and bought in. And now all of a sudden it's like you've lost these close games, and that just carried over into multiple other games, the Kansas game, and on and on and on.
I guess I would say this, Ari. I would probably put, if we were going to Vegas today and putting a hundo on any of these 4 teams to win the conference in 2022, I would probably pick Oklahoma State at this point. I don't feel like they're due to regress. Like I think maybe Baylor is due to regress a little bit. Oklahoma leaves me completely unsure. And the thing about Texas is I can close my eyes and see Texas leading the offense in the Big 12 this year. And I just don't know what that means in terms of one-loss record. They're going to be okay. Are they going to be better than Oklahoma State? And that kind of consistent, that's if you're ready to say yes to that, that's a massive benefit of the doubt that Texas football and or Steve Sarkisian has not yet earned.
Yep, that's a great point. The reason I bring it up, though, is it's such a telling statistic that says that there's going to continue to be parity in this league. There isn't the top heaviness that we saw with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. And that, that was obviously ended after this past year. And it's like, it's just traditionally the NFL, if you have a really bad win-loss record in 1-score games, that tends to even out the next year.
Yep.
I think fans have this belief of like, if we won like Baylor won a bunch of 1-score games, it's because they have something internally from a coaching perspective. They just know how to finish games. Sometimes there's so much luck involved at the end of these games that things have to go your way. And, one year they do, the next year they don't. That's just how it tends to be. And so like, number one, I look at that and think Texas is going to win a lot more 1-score games next year, simply by the fact that they'll be better from a talent perspective, but also because they can't lose all 5 of the 1-score games that they lost this past year.
It's like saying Josh Allen is terrible and 1-score games in the playoffs on the road. It's like, well,
right.
He's 0-1, but he didn't get that win, but like there's more to it than that. And I think that it goes along with exactly what you're saying.
Who's the best quarterback? Who has the best quarterback out of those 4 teams?
Maybe Texas, but I don't know.
Right.
Because they're doing with
big
Quinn
question
Ewers the same
big question
thing.
Mark.
It would be totally different if Sanders was even really good. Like if you go back and look at go look at Spencer Sanders's numbers from the 2021 season. Honestly, the thing I come away thinking to myself is, how the hell did that guy keep starting every week? How has Gundy not found a better option than quite frankly mediocre to get to the level that they got? I'll say this: until proven otherwise, the best 2 head coaches in the Big 12 reside in Stillwater and Waco. And what we can't forget, while we can talk about the 50-50 stuff and all of that with Aranda, we can't lose sight of the fact that what he did a year ago is the single greatest job that any guy's ever done at head coach in the history of the Big 12. Nobody's ever had a better year to take that team from 9th in the preseason to the very top, and to do it with still a talent base that I think we ended up respecting.
Right.
But not,
it wasn't. Yeah.
I mean,
Oklahoma or Texas.
What do we think about Baylor's quarterback position? What do we think about it all year long? Like, they're weirdly champions and kind of a shoulder shrug at like what they had all season.
Right.
Versus, and they were weird all season because honestly, there were games where they'd get great quarterback play for a half.
Right.
It'd be like, whoa, who can beat this team? And then in the second half, you'd go, God, that's awful.
Who can't beat this team?
And they just kept winning games. And even going into this season, it makes me wonder, what am I eventually going to expect from Baylor at the quarterback position? Because if they can get that part figured out, say they get 25-30% more out of their quarterback position on the whole. Well, now Baylor then feels very dangerous to me.
Well, and that's where this goes full circle, Catch, because you made the case that Texas is the best quarterback into the Big 12 in 2022. I mean, you could make the case that Texas had the best quarterback in 2021 because there really wasn't great quarterback play in the conference in 2021. But I'm with you on Oklahoma State, seemingly from the perspective of defense. This is weird. It used to be forever up until this year. If you have the best quarterback in this conference, you'll win the conference. That's not the case anymore. A team that got adequate, at times above average and at times below average quarterback play that just won the conference. And so to bring it full circle, Texas should be a improved offense next year and will be, simply based on the personnel, and then another year of Sarkisian and more of his guys, whatever it is. But I wouldn't pick them to win the conference today for 100 reasons. And maybe the biggest one is because of the defense. And while the defense should be better, the full circle piece here is, can they get an Ochaun Mathis? Can they continue to improve the pass rushing position, linebacker position through the portal? Because that's the difference here. Because Texas's offense was good enough last year. It just can't be the worst defense in the history of Texas football.
Yeah. I'll say this. When I saw the headline that Oklahoma State was hiring Derek Mason to be their defensive coordinator, that felt two things. It felt like the move that officially made Oklahoma State the favorite in the Big 12 because he's really good and he's not taking over trash.
Right.
And B, that felt like a guy that looked at that situation and felt like that'll get me a head coaching gig. That guy doesn't take that job unless he thinks they can come out of that situation with something so notable that it gets his name back in the mix. And usually guys look to do that in the SEC. It says a lot about, I think, the stature that Mike Gundy has developed with Oklahoma State, that Derek Mason, of all people,
right?
That feels like the kind of move Texas would have made, right? Like brand new head coach. Who's your defensive coordinator hire that you're going to go out there and make that, his name kind of speaks for itself. And that's the first time I can ever remember Oklahoma State hiring like that.
Well, and Gundy's done it the opposite. I mean, Jim Knowles was a no-name. I mean, Yursich was at Shippensburg
State.
State.
At Goodwill. And then he just walked into like Saks Fifth and was like, I'll take that thing hanging in the window.
And amazingly, it was what happened to them. And so Oklahoma State had their guy go to Ohio State. And here's Oklahoma State fans thinking this is us being little brother again. And now they go, as you mentioned, to the SEC and get a guy that's been a head coach in the SEC.
No, it to me was a real insight into who they think they are and what they think they can become. And to me, it is not an accident that type of hire is made when Oklahoma looks most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing too is, we're going to talk a lot this offseason, and we already have, about expectations. But are they going to be any less for Texas in 2022 based on what's happened already?
Yes and no. I think the people that are really, really, really paying attention know that you don't go from 5-7 to
10 wins.
It can't be, well, Aranda did it, we can do it. Like, okay, yes.
Right.
I think there's still so many questions. Everybody wants to watch this offense. Everybody is kind of fearful of everything else. And even if on paper, there's almost nobody, if Ewers is the guy that everybody thinks Ewers is going to be, or even 60% of it, and you surround that guy with Bijan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, you add the pieces like Isaiah Neyor now to the outside, where at this time last year, Casey Thompson was playing with Xavier Worthy and Marcus Washington on the outside, and Marcus Washington was mainly on the field to block. No like offense to Marcus Washington and his skill set. He was the team's best blocker as a wide receiver. However, they go from potentially having a guy who's in the game primarily for blocking. They take that out and they put in a guy who's trying to make to the NFL now. That's why Isaiah Neyor transferred, to get to the league and to play in an offense that showcases his talents. I think they think he and Worthy will work so well off of each other because somebody's got to get essentially one-on-one coverage against some schmo with no help, because that's how it works.
Yep.
Unless it's Alabama or Georgia, your last DB's not hanging out on himself on an island, like feeling frisky. They're scared. And Texas a year ago was kind of leaving that out. You wonder, with all of that together, and then you got Brennan Marion comes in with the go-go offense for all the running backs they have. Perfect. What does it mean when your offensive line is so young and or just And that's the thing about Texas, that even before we start talking about the defense, Texas seems absolutely prepared to live and die by as many as 2 or 3 true freshmen in the starting lineup next year on that offensive line. I mean, it kind of worked for Texas A&M this past year, but 9 times out of 10, it feels like a really big gamble. And with a young quarterback who hasn't taken a snap in 2 years, I don't know. Like, Texas is so hard to figure out. They're going to be better. They're going to be better, I think, than like 7-5. But I don't know how carried away you get by saying that.
Right. Well said. That's great perspective. That's Ketch. I'm Ari. Make sure to like the video. If you watched this long, you got to like it. And post your comments, questions down below. We'll address them in future episodes. Subscribe to the channel. But for now, for Ketch, I'm Ari. Peace.
Later.